So welcome to everyone. This is a webinar presented by the G-PST Consortium, that's the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, and LF Energy. This webinar is titled Building an Open Source Strategy at Power Grid Operators. So before I pass it over to our technical presenters today, I'm just going to cover a couple housekeeping items so that everyone understands how to ask questions and everything. So the webinar is being recorded. It will be shared with attendees. We will email that out. It will also be posted on the G-PST website in the next day or so. So we will have the presentation and the recordings all available for attendees after this, if you'd like to share it or send it along to anyone who wasn't able to join us today. For audio, if you're having any audio issues, I'd like to just point you to the audio settings on your Zoom toolbar. It should be, I think, on the bottom left-hand section. Check your audio settings, check your sound output and volume if you're having any issues. You can also dial in by phone. I always recommend if you're having issues with one audio method, just try to swap over to the other one. Or vice versa. So you can dial in or you can join by computer audio. I would also like to direct everyone to, in your Zoom toolbar, that there is a distinct question and answer function. So we will have a panel at the end of this presentations. At the end of our presentations, we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. And we would like you guys to send your questions in through that Q&A function rather than the chat. The Q&A function helps us to keep it organized, helps us to just understand which questions we've already addressed. So please use the Q&A function for any questions you have, and feel free to send in your questions at any time. They will be addressed at the end of the presentation, but you're more than welcome to send them along as you think of the questions. And then finally, if you would like to make a comment, if you would like to say hello or introduce yourself, feel free to use the chat function and just send it to everyone. You can see there that there is a little drop down of who you can send it to. Send it to everyone. We'd love to hear from you. But again, if it is a question for the panelists, do send it into the Q&A function. So I think that's everything in regards to housekeeping items. So with that, I will pass it over to Clayton Barrows of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So Clayton, over to you.
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, so I think we have a very interesting discussion today, and we have contributors from myself from National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'll serve the role as kind of moderator today in place of the chair of the G-PST Pillar 5, Hanale Holtinen, who isn't going to be speaking today, and the other leadership team member, Juha Kiveloma from VTT. But on the speakers today, we have Shuli Goodman from LF Energy, the Linux Foundation Energy, and Lucian Balea from RTE, Jesper Nielsen from Energinet, Arjan Stam from Alliander, and Monti from Aachen University. And I think we have some great discussions ahead about experiences from system operators and some tool developers from the LF Energy, and talking about how we as G-PST and LF Energy can coordinate going forward, and how we can, what roadmaps are towards using open source tools at system operators. Next slide, please. So brief introduction to the G-PST. Many of you have seen this now, but the G-PST is a consortium focusing on supporting power system operators in the transition to integrate and operate high renewable penetration systems and other low emission solutions, kind of supporting that transition to future power systems. Who we are, we have a set of founding system operators that are perhaps further on this path than most of the rest of the world, and then a number of technical institutes that are helping support this through research and studies and technical support around the world, and then a number of developing country system operators who have subscribed to this mission and are along to learn and help support each other in this transition. We're organized into 5 pillars: a research pillar in pillar 1, technical systems pillar in 2, workforce development in 3, technology adoption and standards support in pillar 4, and then we are representing here in pillar 5 the open tools and data, where we're really focused on how do we support the dissemination of the work being done in some of the other pillars to some of the system operators through open tools and data. And a key element of that is how do system operators go about making use of open tools? How do they make the decision to adopt open tools, and how do they build that into their daily work and into their approaches on how they're conducting the system operation? And so that's really the topic of discussion today. And we have some examples from a couple system operators and a couple tool developers that are supporting that transition. And so I am interested in that in my role as at NREL, both from my role in G-PST and supporting pillar 5, but also as a tool developer myself. And so I'm very interested in how we can serve the needs of system operators and build tools that are very useful. So with that, I'll pose a couple questions. So first, how you can engage with G-PST. We have a number of ways of getting involved. There you can be on our mailing list to receive webinar invitations. You can engage in these sort of activities where we have webinars, but you can also request assistance in a few ways by emailing the global PST. You can also, if you're really interested, you can join our pillar 5 working group, where we have a group that meets bi-monthly to discuss these activities and discuss tools that would be most useful and webinars that would be informative. Okay, next slide. So I think we're slightly out of order here, but for this particular discussion, we have 3 kind of guiding umbrella questions that we want to address and have the contributors address in their discussions. So first, why would you do this at a system operator? Why would you build this open source capacity? What does the transition look like? What does that roadmap towards having that open source capacity at operators look like? And then, obviously there will be challenges. Well, what do those look like? What challenges can be expected? What experiences are in the way? And we want to hear about a little bit of those from both the perspective of tool developers, community organizers like the LF Energy, and then the system operators themselves. So with that, I'll turn it to Shuli Goodman, who is the chair of the LF Energy Foundation, and turn it over to you. And I'll ask the question right up front of what is an OSPO, and so if you can introduce that through the conclusion of your section, that would be very useful. Shuli.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Hanale and Juha. And thank you to the Global Power System Transformation Network. It is a pleasure to be here. It is a pleasure to be embarking on something together. I think we have a lot of commonalities and ways that we can support each other. I also want to thank my board, and in particular, I want to thank Lucian, Arjan, and Anto, and I think that they have a lot of really interesting things to share. I will say right from the get-go, I feel like this is one of those elevator pitches, and that we are speed dating, and so I feel like I have maybe 3 or 4 floors of an elevator to go down, and so I'm going to go really quickly. And the thing that I want to say right up at the top is, after this panel, go to the LF Energy website, and I think that you'll see a lot more in detail, things that you can go slower with. We have a lot of videos. You can get all our software, and you can understand better what the Linux Foundation is. And so the LF in LF Energy stands for Linux Foundation, and the Linux Foundation is the home of the Linux kernel, and it's the home of about 600 other really consequential software. So an OSPO is an open source program office, and it is a strategic, it really represents a strategic investment on the part of the organization to shift how they are thinking about software development. I am not going to go into why digitalize. I think most of you probably understand that if you've got hardware and you're going to need software in order to be able to orchestrate, choreograph, firmware, whatever it is. And so software becomes incredibly important. Our friends from Energinet and Jesper, we'll talk about what Energinet is doing, really ultimately understood that about 50% of the energy transition is probably digitalization. What we have found globally in every single industry, 80 to 90% of software is in fact open source. So open source is not something that, kind of coming up with on our own. We're actually following a really well-worn path. So can you, Isabel, go down to the first slide? Okay, so the design challenge, not enough time, not enough resources. We need interoperability and no vendor lock-in. I think you'd all agree with that. Next one. Because of that, open source really becomes probably one of the most important and critical tools that we have to meet those preconditions. Next one. So I'm going to just do, I'm going to set the table. What is open source? Open source code is something that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance. There is a permissive intellectual property license. At the heart of the Linux Foundation really is a legal framework. The software all lives in the Linux Foundation, and LF Energy is the funding mechanism. The money that our members put in is not going, is being decided by the board where we actually spend it. So what is open source? The ability to have control, to examine the code, security so that we can fix and update, community to support and build. And Lucian and Arjan will talk a lot about that. Interoperability, incorporating open standards and shared development. Faster, cheaper, more secure. That's basically our mantra. Next. So, you'll see my PhD is in innovation theory. So I look at diffusion curves all the time. And part of knowing where you are in terms of the ability to transform is knowing where you are in the diffusion curve. We are just about hitting takeoff with open source. And so you can see that we're probably somewhere around 80 million or so open source GitHub sites. Next. So the question then becomes, isn't whether open source is, going to happen or not. It's really which project matters. Next. So at the Linux Foundation and in LF Energy, what we're looking at are the key projects that if we support and build ecosystems around them, can provide the critical and high value projects in order to enable, in this case, the energy transition and the transformation of power networks. And so that's where our focus is. Next. This is what our, this is what our mission statement is. It's really looking at action around decarbonization through open source, open frameworks, reference architectures, and a support ecosystem of complementary projects. At another time, would really love to go through the architecture, how we're thinking about it, where we believe, folks are going to talk about that some, but it is what we want to be able to create is a mental model. It's not just enough to say decarbonization. The next statement really has to be, so what, then what? And so that becomes a critical aspect of what LF Energy is doing is, you know, you guys are, some of you are information enterprise architects. We want to take those enterprise architects and build a mind meld together, come to agreement together. This is what we're going to do, and then enable technology transfer. Next. At the heart of LF Energy is governance. And so I'm just going to take a couple more slides and talk about that. And the reason why is that, you know, you can build a GitHub site, but there really isn't any governance. There's, you know, you could have somebody walk away with a trademark or a copyright. You could have somebody, a patent troll, you know, take something, and you wouldn't really have the ability to defend it. And so that's what the Linux Foundation does, is it takes the most important software on the planet and protects it. It creates a series of projects that link Kubernetes with Operator Fabric and Possible and GXF, you know, along with Hyperledger and you know, the projects from LF networking and what 5G is built on. So that's the important part. We split the financial part and the technical steering committees. The technical steering committees are composed of all of the maintainers. They roll up together into a technical advisory council. And this allows us to have visibility and allows us to invest in capacity building. We are all learning as we are going. And part of that then means, how do we create technical communities that can actually enable your software to scale, enable you to implement software, and that's where the technical community comes in. The governing board is where decision-making is made, and where finances, where we determine where are we going to spend our resources. Next. So you know, another way of looking at this is kind of a nested version where you have the technical advisory council and then the various different projects and then the governing board. Next. So right now we are, I think we are at 16 projects for, whoops, too far. Back up. Isabel? Yeah. Okay. So these are our projects today. And one of the things that I see kind of happening is that the software is getting better and better. What's not on here is the Green Data Hub from Energinet, open short-term forecasting that came in from Alliander. Let's see, there are a few others. Oh, Everest, which is a complete stack for electric mobility. So we are really beginning to move at the speed of the urgency, and the software is coming in, and it's good software. So go on our website, you can see all those things. We'll get pages for the new ones we just adopted. Flexibility is the name of the game right now. And also really virtualization and automation. And I think Lucian is going to talk some about that as well. Next. These are our members. We've had 3 recent members that have come on board in the last week. And this is really everything that I do is either about membership or software. And so it is with a next. So I'm going to turn this over. Oh, I know, one more thing. So the membership model, a lot of times people next, They are not aware of kind of how does the membership model work. Basically, there are really two tiers. There's a strategic tier and there's a general tier. And you're going to hear from Lucian and Arjan, who are really taking dependencies upon LF Energy as being central to their strategic ability and capacity to meet their obligations for decarbonization. We'd like to see more folks join us. And I think that they will tell you about the business case and the value of that and how it has transformed their organizations. Next. So this is how to get in touch with me. You can go all the way to the end. That's true. Isolation and going along are no longer viable. But Isabel, if you can skip to the last slide. Thank you. So this is how to get in touch with me. My calendar can be found online. I am happy to have conversations with you. And these are all the links that you might need. I think that this deck will be given out. There's some other slides that we hid that we'll make available to you. And I'm going to pass it on. Thank you.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Lucian. I'm working at RT. So it's a pleasure to be here and to see this great attendance. So first of all, RT is the power transmission system operator in France, and my role at RT is to lead the open source strategy. So Isabel, if we go to the next slide, please. So more than 3 years ago, RT decided to embrace open source and to put it at the heart of our software development activities. And to understand this shift, I need to put it in context. So one core mission of RT is to support the energy transition and the shift towards a carbon neutral society and economy by 2050. And in this context, we are facing an increasing software roadmap that will help us to adapt our business and our processes to this new context. And this software roadmap is inflating, I would say, faster than our capability to deliver. We need to deploy more complex software, and we have little time to do so. And what I must say also is that a few days away of the next COP26, for sure, nobody would want to be the blocking factor for this energy transition. And we must recognize also that the signs of climate change will worsen in the future. So the expectations and the pressure will grow. And at the same time, we need to preserve our operational performance because electricity is a vital good for our society and economy. So if we go to next slide, please. So the question is, and you can press one more time, please. The question is how to get more complex software, and more complex software faster and cheaper. And the need is to increase tenfold the speed, the cost efficiency, and innovation of our core business software development projects. We are talking about software that is at the heart of our activities. And the image I put in the background is a quantum computing chip. And the reason is that sometimes you cannot meet your goals with business as usual practices. With computing, you could increase slightly the performance year by year according to Moore's law, but there are some problems that you cannot tackle with these approaches, and you need disruptive approaches such as quantum computing if you want to achieve this. And it's a bit the same in the situation that we are confronted to. We believe that, of course, we could improve our traditional ways to build software, marginally, but this will never meet the expectations. So that's basically the reason why we turn to open source. So if we go to next slide, please. So we have been inspired by other industries, and the reason for building an open source capacity today is the following. So first of all, we want to benefit from the leverage model, so joining forces to build solutions that fulfill joint needs, and this will allow us to build faster and cheaper software and reusing what exists. But that's not the only benefit that we are looking for, although the most obvious. We also expect that this new way of building software will improve the quality of what we are doing. So we want to go to more modularity, more interoperability. We want to move away from the traditional monolithic systems that we are using in our industry. Also, in addition to joining forces, we believe that open source will allow us to join brains, and this will improve innovation. So through collaboration, first of all, we will share viewpoints, ideas. We will have we will enable additive innovation, but also the solutions that we are talking about to solve our problems are various kinds, and they require various competencies. For instance, we are talking about AI technologies, we are talking about edge computing, we are also talking about more interrelations, interdependencies between the mobility sector and the energy sector, or maybe tomorrow with the hydrogen sector. So all this will require a more diverse set of competencies, and we believe that we will not be able to gather all these competencies internally. And last but not least, we want to move away from lock-in, from vendor lock-in, because we believe that this provides the wrong incentives, both to vendors and to customers, and this impedes velocity and cost efficiency. And also, it's not only about vendor lock-in, but also I also believe that open source collaborations can help us to move away from customer-specific solutions that are not efficient as well from the vendor perspective, because they need to maintain and develop branches of their products, which is a loss of efficiency. So if we go to next slide, please, Isabel. Yeah. So we got inspired by other industries, and we had the opportunity to make a study towards the Linux Foundation and see what happens in other industries and how they are leveraging open source collaborations. And this allowed us to imagine a new vision for the energy sector. And we deliberately decided not to reinvent the wheel, but just to transpose this model to the energy sector with LF Energy. And I must say that 3 years ago, when we started this journey, it was a bet, because we did not know that if it would succeed or not. But today, I'm happy to say that looking at the growth of our projects, the growth of our members, and also the size of the dynamics of the community, that it has been a successful journey so far. So if we go to the next slide, please. Concretely, what are we talking about? So this is just an example of what happens at LF Energy. There are 4 TSO-DSO collaborations involving RT and Alliander that have grown up. These are unexpected collaborations because these were not planned 3 years ago when we started our journey. And I put emphasis on this because I believe that we need a strong collaboration between transmission and distribution system operators in the future if we want to build the seamless and evolutive interface that will help us to manage a power system that will be completely different, with more distributed and with levers at the distribution level. So these 4 projects, for instance, and briefly, Operator Fabric is a new smart HMI concept for system operations. OpenSTF is a platform to manage forecasting models for renewable generation and loads. So this project has been contributed recently by Alliander. Compass is about IEC 61850 configuration tools, and CPAS is a virtualization platform. So the purpose is to run virtualized automation and protection applications in the power grid substations. If we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said, inspired by others and other industries and giants, we imagined a big shift, not only at the corporate level, but also at the industry level. And under LF Energy umbrella, we are working today with all our ecosystem, technology vendors, software developers, etc. So this is a big vision, but my message also today is that you should not wait to have all this big vision set to start an open source journey. And you should start soon and small, and as it is said, fail fast. And why am I saying that? Because we experienced that by practicing, things were demystified, and there were a lot of learning in the process, and also onboarding from existing communities that help us to understand and solve questions and issues that were not fully clear when we started this journey. So this is an invitation to join us soon. Thanks a lot, and I'm turning to Arjan for the next presentation.
Yes, thank you, Lucian. Hi, my name is Arjan Stam. Thanks for having me here. And I would like to share some ideas about going open source and collaborations. Like Clayton mentioned at the introduction, maybe we could go back to the title slide. And like Clayton said at the introduction, the question is, how do you come to a decision to go open source? Well, that is exactly the same happened at Alliander. That was our journey as well. And we found an answer, and it was, well, we go to LFE, of course. And that's what I'd like to share some ideas on how we got there. Next slide, please. So there's something interesting happening at the DSO level. So no longer the distribution operator is described as a network operator, but it's transitioning to a system operator. And that's something completely different. That's a completely different business. And talking about it, well, we can describe certain characteristics of what the system operator should do. But in practice, it's a humongous transition going from one type of company to the other one. First of all, it's about customers. In the past, we just sold connections, grid connections, and we give the guarantee implicitly that there was 7x24 energy due to all kind of design policies. But this time, and now, due to renewables and the changing energy demand, that's all changing. So there we have to communicate with our customers, and they're actually part of solving our problems. And we have to recognize that and involve them. Also finding a strategy. I think for the TSO, maybe there are the same challenges. I'm not too much into that, but for the DSO, it's not really clear what kind of direction we should follow in solving the energy transition in terms of facilitating free energy markets, for example, or guaranteeing grid safety as a DSO. Those are all questions in the past we didn't address to the extent we need to do it now in terms of energy management. what's also happening is that it requires an architecture that helps us understand what we need to build, basically, to get all the use cases running that we see in front of us. And to the right, you see a visualization of our vision on how we think we should build and develop the grid and operate it. It's a long story behind it. It's too long for sharing here now, but that's all behind it. We have to deal with system complexity in terms of system control. For the TSO, balancing a grid and doing system control is more common, but at the DSO level, it's certainly not. And what we have to figure out ourselves is how are we going to get a stable control of the distribution grid, having all kinds of fluctuations and changing profiles within the energy flows. And that's only the technical part, because in the end, you want to achieve some goals, also goals that have impact on society. So we want to use basically the distribution grid to help solve the climate issues we have at this point in time. And for that, we also need disruptive innovations. Maybe that's not only technology, it's also applying combinations of technology in the sense of changing use cases that we did in the past differently. What we can do now completely different in a system context. So the interoperability between a customer and an energy supplier and distribution operator, for example. You can change roles, shift roles, everything becomes virtual and it's interchangeable. And also, of course, most of it, and we're talking a lot about it already, data. But data has many dimensions in the type of application you want to use it for. So for us, it goes through a process, through a chain of events. Well, maybe next slide. So what's happening is, how do we reach that vision? How do we build it? And that's something we say we can't do it ourselves. Right? We need to collaborate, we need to build, we need to co-create. And one of the things is that we, at that point in time, were looking for how can we cooperate, for example, with a TSO and other DSOs. And one thing that was really missing was a common language, a common understanding of how the system should look like. And we found that in the Linux Foundation Energy. So, for example, here is, you find it also on our website, the functional architecture. So here we created a common language on talking about the same functionalities we use both at the DSO and the TSO. Only the implementation is different. So we can work here on common plumbing in terms of applications for utilizing and building those functionalities, both for the DSO and the TSO. And that's where the magic starts to happen, because we have the same challenges, and we need to spend the same effort on realizing actually the same system, because we are in the same market here. Next slide, please. So, for example, we were looking for, especially for system operations, for an architecture that would help us build the power system network operator, functionalities. And we didn't have one. We, as Alliander, we started working as a system operator, but it was a capability we did not have. We started it as the 1st of January this year. So what are we going to do? And what helped was having a discussion within LFE about the with the architects of how an architecture should look like. And this is the result of what came out. And on top of it, we have plotted the project we have. So you can see already quite a number of components are available to fill in this type of architecture. So operator fabric, you saw it already. Now we do quite a heavy investment in operator fabric because we need it as a visualization of how the system is actually working. And the interesting part about this, it's not happening in our control room. We're not using the control of the energy flow, energy management in our energy system from the control room. We do it just digital from anywhere. Next slide, please. So what helped us was actually getting together with RTE and having a discussion about the commonalities and how we could enforce those and amplify those to make it work for us together. So not talking about the traditional high voltage, low voltage, medium voltage, but from a system perspective. That helped us understand mutually what we had to do, and we could collaborate easy on that. What also is happening is really a transition. So having a discussion about how it should work and understanding one another in the ambitions of how you want to build your system operator capability helps also in understanding what kind of transition you have to do within the company. So a lot of development and discussions internally, also at Alliander, are typically very siloed. And what helped us in having the discussion in the open source community was also that we started to copy the same kind of community behavior and organization inside Alliander. So we also have now a quite heavy inner source capability working. Well, that's also a matter of ambition. We know there's a lot of climate goals outside. We're all part of it. But the interesting part is we can help achieve those goals by working from ambition and helping the world getting insights, for example, in energy usage, the discussion about origin of energy. We can help, we can create those insights, we can help people understand where CO2 is produced and where it comes from, but we have to collaborate together in order to make these insights available to the outside world. We are also in one system. So it's no longer about different type of power levels, what we're in, so high voltage, medium voltage, low voltage, but we're just in one energy system with a lot of stakeholders that all have a role and that have to collaborate. And what we experienced so far is that LFE is an agnostic, a partnership agnostic area in which for everybody and every stakeholder is room to have a discussion to understand how we can connect to this development of energy transition tools. And one important decision we took also at Alliander is we didn't put open source as a constraint on our development and the way going forward. But what we did is embedded in our governance. So it really became a strategic pillar in our way forward to build our system operations capability. Next slide. That's it. Thank you.
Right. Can you guys see and hear me? I believe.
You can. Yep.
All right, cool. So yeah, I'm just gonna tell you a little about the open source journey at Energinet. So our journey and consideration and what initiatives we have at the moment. So yeah, just the next one. So here you see the agenda and so on. You can read through this afterwards if needed. Just take the next one. So my name is Jesper Nielsen. Very hard to pronounce, but I tried. I'm senior director of a division in Energinet called Data and Systems. So today I'm gonna tell you a little about what kind of considerations I have had going in this direction towards trying to get some understanding of what's LF-Energy about and how do I get that experience that's needed on that kind of journey. So yeah, just the next one. So Energinet is the Danish transmission system operator. I will leave the facts for you guys to read, but the last one is our vision at Energinet is actually some of what I believe has made us take these decisions to go towards open source and LF energy, is that we believe that to create green energy for a better world, we somehow need to face all the challenges that we have in the ecosystem around energy, and how can we combine that with the right speed of developing software. So I believe that's two key ingredients for us to make this vision work, is actually to combine these two. And how do we do that? One of the answers to me is open source is at least needs to be one of the things that we need to consider, not only for the technology part, but also considering can open source actually also be a new ways of working. We are doing agile, but also how can we combine agile and open source in our product development strategy in the control center on a daily basis. So we have a vision about more efficient development and software through collaboration and innovation. I think that's the biggest change that I'm making towards it, is that I'm understanding now that to do this, I can't do it alone. It's hard to get the right developers. It's hard to develop the right products alone. So somehow you need to start doing this in collaboration with others. And open source is the platform to do that in a good way, and also considering the need for governance and so on. So we have 4 strategic key elements. How can we early on get some understanding of what open source is, and how do we take on this journey in Energinet. So I'm gonna start. Next slide, please. So why open source at Energinet? So CSOs like ours are increasingly tapping into all these communities. So Energinet is a part of G-PST and LF Energy, and that's because we've said to ourselves, okay, we need to do this with others. We see an increased demand for development and innovation competences, and that's just a challenge that we're facing at the moment. We see that we have the opportunity to create value that can benefit ourselves and others at the same time, because we are all facing the same problem with operating the energy systems. So open source, as I told earlier, is a great platform for collaboration, co-creation, thinking differently, and continue learning. Because if we want to face this challenge about the vision about green energy for a better world, we need to do this together, and we need to do it on the right platform to create the right speed. Next one. So how do we look at this at Energinet? Because you can see at open source from different parameters. So you could actually just consume open source software, but that means you don't require that much involvement, but your influence is not going to be that big. In the other end, you have the leadership capabilities. So if you have something that you believe is important to you to build on, and you want to have a high influence and high involvement in it, you could take leadership on it. And that's where I see LF Energy is coming into the picture, because here you have the opportunity to go into a leadership role if you have some capabilities you want to be able to have influence on, and you want to create it, and you want to create it with others. So at Energinet, we are consuming open source, but we're not on a strategic level yet. We are learning by doing. So at the moment, we are facing the Data Hub 3.0, and at the previous slide, you saw that I think it's called Green Energy Hub now in LF Energy. That project just joined the LF Energy, and basically that project is facilitating the whole billing to every consumer in the Danish energy system. And we're facilitating all the settlement and billings and the metering. We're facilitating that process. And that's where we are starting our journey, is that when we build the new data hub that we are going to do, we're doing at the moment, we want to do it in open source, and we want others to join us if they want to. So we are just starting to understand about how do you actually build a community around this, and how do you engage with surroundings, sharing insights and learning internally and externally also. So the thing about open source is understanding that at a management level is quite hard, both on the development side, but how do you do that in how are the economics around open source? How is that actually working? Normally, you would just go out to a vendor and buy software. Now you somehow have to change this way of doing things also. So we are still at understanding this, and we know that this is a journey, and we need to get involved and get on the journey. All right, next one. Yeah, so open source at Energinet is a part of our digitalization effort. We're trying to target this at two angles. So the political and strategic thing. So we try to, influence development of the Danish national digitalization strategy. So could we influence that by making them look towards an open source first approach? And then on the other hand, also this open source first approach, we need to consider that before taking decisions about what systems, what tools to build or to have in the TSO or in the control center. Then we are at the moment trying to implement this open source first principle across the organizations, and that's both in the consumption part of the model that I showed on the previous slide, and also when considering new developments. How can we get this into our decisions making in the organizations? So an experience we have had is that open source from the beginning makes it easier to establish great culture and sufficient documentation of the project, and converting from to open source when you have built something is actually expensive and time consuming. So if you want to do this, do it at the beginning when you start something. Think it in from the beginning. That's a recommendation from here. On the right hand, I just briefly showed you some of the projects where we are going into open source and where we had it in as from the beginning, so they are born open source, and also where we converted different functionalities and capabilities, and also where are we actually open sourcing into the LF Energy community. And here I need to take the Data Hub 3.0 down to the last one, open source in the LF Energy community now. So it's a journey. I think that's the crucial thing. All right, next one. So yeah, open source, work in progress, and some of the next steps that I have. So at the moment, I'm considering developments in the grid operation area. I'm considering how can we get involved in the short-term forecasting, as Alliander just showed. How can we start contributing, collaborating around that with Alliander? We have a situation awareness tool where we're actually trying to, how can we support the operators with better decisions based on historian data and also historian simulations and so on? Could we somehow use patterns to actually support the operators better on a daily basis? We have had a dialogue with RTE around the dynamic stability tools. That's still ongoing, but we're going there. And then again, just getting involved and start getting engaged with other TSOs, technology leaders as LF Energy, G-PST, and so on, starting sharing knowledge, collaboration, community building, and so on. And at Energinet, we don't have an OSPO yet, but we're considering it. We want to establish that at the right level of support to support the entire organization. Next one. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Okay, so I take over now from my side. Good afternoon, my name is Monti. I'm professor at RWTH Aachen and scientist at Fraunhofer FIT. And we talk about the role of open source in the research environment. Next, please. Well, as an academic, I must say we have open source in the genes. So everything we do is open. That's a strategy specifically of my institute. We also created an association in German, Verein, connected to my institute that manages the website you see here. And everything we develop, we release it there and advertise there so that people know what kind of activities we are doing. It's for us as academic necessary because we are built as academics on the culture of cooperation and community. But I'll give you 3 precise examples how this concept works and why it's so critical. Next slide, please. Let me start with the, click one more time. There is probably a little animation. Yeah. So let me start with the Horizon 2020 project that we did a couple of years ago called Sonio. We developed a concept of platform microservice-based focus on distribution system automation. We came out with a very innovative concept thanks to cooperation with the ICT companies. And then during the project, with the push with the European Commission, we have been working on that directly as an open source. What's the result of doing this approach? It comes in the next slide, please, is that at the end of the project, we had the possibility to continue working so that things don't end with the funding. Can you go to the next slide, please? And we were able to port our experience in the project and make it available to the community through the Linux Foundation. So that's for me a very good example that starting, as was said in the previous presentation, with open source from the beginning when you're still in the research phase and things are not mature, allows you then quickly to transition from an end of a project. Normally when funding ends, projects ends in some drawing and nobody's using them. But because we were open source, we were able to continue, bring it to the foundation. And now it's very active and successful cooperation that we have. And we are anticipating very nice development in the next couple of months. Second direction, and where it makes sense for academic, if you can go to the next slide, is cooperation within the academic world. So right now we are involved with many other partners in a European project called Migrate 2.0, which is about connecting European smart grid infrastructure. We want to connect the many laboratories we have across Europe so that we can work together, we can learn from each other, and we can speed up the research process as well. How do you do this? Again, please, next slide. We do it through developing an open source software that facilitates this connection. We have developed a set of a framework that we call it VILAS, Virtual Integrated Laboratory for Large System Simulation, which is a combination of tools which allow us to link laboratory, perform real-time experiment across Europe. And thanks to all these tools, any laboratory can join and work with us. We have installed this in now several laboratories across Europe, and they're working with us. And given that we have NRL here, actually the first experiment in the large scale that we did with these technologies were actually together with NREL when we did an across-ocean collaboration with 5 nodes in US and 2 in Europe using this type of software. That shows our cooperation really through open source is possible also at the scientific level. The third point I would like to touch, so please go to the next slide, is about education. Through open source, we develop also solutions that we can share with other academics to build innovative education. The whole energy transition needs also a new generation of engineers that are able to cope with digitalization, understand all the topics we are discussing today at a different level. We cannot just have classical power system engineers. We need people like many of the colleagues that are here in the call that understand this cross domain between digitalization, digital technologies and power systems. For that reason, we are developing a lot of tools to help our students understanding. Here you see a combination of other open source tools in creating a common systems. Villas Web coming from, that's the interface of the Villas framework I showed before. DPSync is an open source software simulator, which is also part of the Sonio platform, the Linux Foundation. And Jupyter is an open source project that we using to create the user interface for the students so that they can perform experiment virtually in an open environment. If you go to the next slide, that's an example. We call this SLU, that stands for Second Life for the Energiewende. The students can connect, do experiments on the power systems in real time, extract data, bring them to the Jupyter notebooks for post-processing, learning things about the complexity of power system dynamics in a way that was not possible before. And that's the way we can create the next generation of digital power engineers. And that's what we are committed a lot in my university. We're actually planning to develop a full new program at the master level to be sure we prepare the engineers we need for this energy transition. Going to the next slide for the conclusion. So open source is an obvious approach for academics. The research itself is based on cooperation and community, and that's what open source is about. And it used to be for us simply a way to cooperate among academics, but as I show you, particularly for the first example, it's now driving the way we work with industry. So it's a 360-degree ways for us as academic to work and cooperate with the board. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, everybody, for the really useful and insightful presentations. That concludes our set of presentations, but I'd like to invite everybody, all the panelists on video and audio, to have a bit of a discussion. We have a few more minutes scheduled till 15:15 that we can have a bit of discussion, and there have been a couple questions submitted through the Q&A feature that we can start with. Most of them have been addressed, at least initially, through text. But please feel free to send some more questions as we go through this. But I'll kind of kick this off because I think there's a really compelling question that was posted in the Q&A from Russ Philbrick about, open source being, we've indicated a number of examples of benefits and adoption from open source, and kind of been speaking of it as if it were a bit of a panacea. But there is a number of examples where organizations and people have chosen to remain using commercial or closed license software, and it kind of begs the question of what is the relative role of open versus closed source software? I mean, are there, in the future, does there remain a role for closed source software? What is it? What distinguishes that from open source? And I mean, I have some opinions on this of my own, but I'm really interested in particularly the opinions of the folks in the system operators, and what you think in terms of what's the role in the future of proprietary commercial software versus open source tools.
So maybe to start answering, first of all, we are convinced that there is still a role for commercial business around open source. So open source is certainly not gratis. So as end users, when we are using open source, we need to have some support services, customization services, maintenance services, correcting bugs, flows, etc. And there are two ways to do that. Either we hire people to invest and build that competence and join the projects, or there is somebody on the marketplace that already has this competence and we can buy these services from him. So, if we look at the valuation of some companies that are performing with open source, we can see that this can be a lucrative business. So this is one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that we are not saying that 100% of the code that we will be using should be open source. What we are saying is that we should build in open source the common plumbing. So everything that serves as a platform as common plumbing that enables interoperability, because we do not see in our future IT system, we do not see monolithic applications. We rather see a constellation of applications that need to talk together and across businesses, across traditional businesses. So for instance, internal businesses like system operations, asset management, but also externally, we need to have this interoperability between the transmission system operator, the distribution system operator, and the distributed energy or flexibility resource. And if we want to achieve that, we cannot say that one vendor would just build the wall. So maybe the answer could be that proprietary software is suitable where you can have monolithic applications that can be specified, but in our context with more modularity and also learning by doing and iterations, we see a significant role for open source, on top of which companies can build their own software, proprietary software. And that's the goal, is to have the combination of the two, from artist perspective, at least.
Thank you, Lucian. I'm welcome any other perspectives as well. So if anybody else wants to chime in, please do.
Well, I can maybe put a few words on it. So the same page as Lucian, I believe that we somehow need to I mean, the amount of development that we need to do to create a better world. I believe we need every software developer in the world to do that. So I think we need somehow to make the open source world coexist with the rest of the ecosystem. So somehow I think we need to balance this to create the right amount of speed and the right amount of service level because I mean, the software that we're building here is some of the most critical to actually run and balance an energy system, and we need the best developers in the world to do that. So somehow we need to balance, and we need to make it coexist, and that might require us to rethink business models and so on. But I think if we believe we can do it together, and there is a place for all of us, I believe this can coexist. That's my opinion. Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts on this, and so for LF Energy to be successful, commercial companies need to take commercial dependencies, and if we don't enable that, then LF Energy won't be successful. The history of innovation and the history of the diffusion of innovation is that historically one will find that folks, like if you look at the internet, and think about WordPress, like right now you can throw up a website and have been able to do that for many years. There were a lot of companies that were selling that as a service. And in the end, they lost their shirts because they bet on the wrong thing. So I think it's important to recognize that there are parts of the system that are going to represent commodities. And towards that end, we need to enable a company like a GE or Hitachi or a Siemens or a Microsoft or an IBM or or a Google to be able to take that code and build on top of it new innovations. The democratization of innovations is going to drive new sources of value and capital. So this is not about capital destruction, but it is about learning how to move more quickly. What Jesper is saying, we are so far behind right now that that the data that is coming out is that we're maybe at about 7%, 5 to 7% of where we need to be in the next 8 years. That is a huge gap that we need to close. And the only way we're going to do it is together. And the Lennox Foundation has a track record of making sure that companies take commercial dependencies. So whether you're Cisco or you're Ericsson or Juniper Networks, any of those companies, they all had to transform themselves to enable 5G and to move towards software-defined infrastructure. We're basically doing the same thing.
Excellent, thanks. So there have been a couple other questions that I think are being addressed in the Q&A. There were a couple of questions earlier that were sent to me that I'll kind of seed for discussion now. The first one is around discussing the value that you've seen as strategic members of LF Energy, but also one around what the role of government in supporting the commercialization, or that kind of gets into the discussion that we've just been having of the commodification of various elements of these ecosystems. So how does LF Energy, or just open source communities in general, support both the innovation that you're doing from a development standpoint and application standpoint, as well as towards the commodification of these solutions? Any insights there from panelists?
Maybe I can answer on the second part, because that fits perfectly to one of the example I made. So that our project was originally funded by the European Commission, and what we experienced historically that we have projects, we develop great ideas, and then they stay there because the funding is over, and then the ideas are lost at the end. And this is a major concern the European Commission had for a long time. So they're always pushing to find a way to create sustainability on project results. And I think that's what we experience right now with the Sonia project, that because we were able to keep it alive, then we bridge to other funding, we are still feeding, at the same time we're creating a community, and then it's becoming really a product. So that allows us to do this last jump in the innovation path that is typically very difficult to do. And so it gives you that sustainability that otherwise projects developed by academics normally don't have. So there is a great leverage of government funding with this scheme, I think, and is appreciated by the European Commission.
Thanks, Anto. Any other sort of clear indicators of value from coordinating with open source communities from the panelists?
I wanted to answer just one thing that Herman Karsten said is, who's going to do this? It's like, there's so much to do. Who's going to do this? I am increasingly alarmed that skilled humans are in fact the gating factor to being able to make the energy transition. And so therefore, if we can get a community of a good 10,000 really good developers all working together to do this, we will be successful. If we cannot focus those resources globally, I think we're going to be in a world of hurt. And so I think that the human skilled factor is essential. that we get real about, like really real about.
Thanks, Shuli, for jumping in. I was going to raise that sort of next, is, you know, that there's this question. I think it's been a theme throughout Russ's comments and a few others, that yeah, we have this constant theme of there is so much to do in this space, and perhaps one of the takeaways from each of the presentations today and our discussion here is that open source can support that level of effort by building opportunities to coordinate across teams, opportunities to contribute from a very wide swath of developers and contributors and thought leaders, you know, anywhere, and perhaps just making reducing the duplication of work, and, you know, making solutions available so that we can build upon them in a more efficient way than other approaches. So
yeah, and I would also like to add that from a strategic member perspective, this is mainly the main benefit that we get, is the fact that we have a platform where we can discuss where are the core needs from our perspective, and what kind of solutions are missing today if we want to be efficient and transform our activities, and iterating with the other board members, understanding where we have shared vision and we could join forces. Also understanding where we need to look for additional partners that are not in the ecosystem yet, and focus this effort to build these new ecosystems, because people often think about the open source value as the value from the code, but I would rather say that the value of open source is in the community. So the fact that there is a team that is able to transform the existing code to fit the needs that we will have in 1, 2, 3 years from now, or even 10 years from now, and to be able to do so, being part of the community is really where the richness of open source is. It's not because it's free and available on internet that you get that.
And I mean, so we are at our time. We are slightly over our time. So I will kind of conclude with thanking the panelists and reminding any participants that have extra questions to feel free to continue to reach out. There's emails and points of contact. I think any of us would be happy to receive a follow-up question via email. And I will remind folks that this is the first event of a ongoing collaboration and kind of sub-series through G-PST Pillar 5, that we will have additional webinars, and we've been planning some additional webinars where we're in coordination with LF Energy, where we'll showcase some of the tools that have been developed by LF Energy and other developers, and we'll be moving forward in this vein to address some of the questions and some of the opportunities that have been raised in the talks and the discussion today. So in conclusion, again, thank you to each of the panelists, and thank you to Hanale and the rest of the G-PST leadership for hosting, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everybody.
Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Thank you.